so I guess the hawk felt secure, and it was perched on the ledge at eye level, only like 4 feet from me. But yet there was this gap in between, so I guess it felt safe. And it was just pulling apart a rat, and you could hear it like crunching through the bones and hearing the sinew rip. It was spectacular.
You are listening to Urban Wildlife Podcast.
Hey, podcast listener. We are releasing this particular episode about red-tailed hawks in Philadelphia and in cities more general in coordination with the Field Guides podcast. We're both releasing urban hawk episodes. They're going to be doing one on Cooper's hawks, so as soon as you finish listening to this episode, head on over to the Field Guides, either through their website or through your podcast listening app of choice. Download their Cooper's hawks episode and make it an urban hawk twofer.
Welcome back to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. This is one of your co-hosts, Billy Brown, with
Tony Crosdale
and
Christian Hunold.
We are currently freezing our toes off. It's not that bad. It's chilly. And we are at Logan Circle in Philadelphia, bringing you a Field Guides style podcast episode about urban red-tailed hawks.
That's right.
I'll do the standard stuff. If you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Twitter at UrbWildlifeCast. Find us on Facebook. Whatever your podcast listening app of choice, please leave us a positive review there, and that helps other people find the podcast. And please feel free to let us know what ideas you might have. I hope this episode opens up people's ideas and gets your wheels turning about other ways we can do an episode, or you might be able to do an episode if you're in a place where you can observe some interesting urban wildlife in your city and do some recording outside with it. We would love to incorporate that into an episode. So we're going to talk a little bit about red-tailed hawks in cities. Let's start with Tony. Tell us a little bit about red-tailed hawks.
Red-tailed hawks are a large hawk. They are a buteo, which is the group of hawks that have long, broad wings and medium-sized, short tails that are kind of wide. And they generally, across the genus, seem to favor small mammals, although there are some that diverge from that and specialize in birds or amphibians or insects even. But red-tailed hawks, they're on the large side, not the largest buteo, but they're on a large side for buteos, and they traditionally specialize in squirrels, rabbits, voles, mice, but they will eat reptiles and birds as well. And they, their name, Buteo jamaicanensis, means that they're actually in the Caribbean, but they range from like southern Mexico and Belize all the way up to subarctic Canada and Alaska. And they have a bunch of different color morphs. Mostly they're brown above, creamy below with a red tail on top. But there are some that are almost all black with like a whitish tail and kind of everything in between. And they are, I think, very beautiful, and they are the source of the typical hawk noise that you, or eagle noise.
That's right, in movies, whenever you hear an eagle, it's actually a red-tailed hawk.
Yeah, eagles kind of do this like bald eagles kind of do this like little cackle-y noise.
Which totally does not sound appropriate for their heft, you know?
Yeah.
That's right.
And red tails make like the greatest noise you've ever heard a bird make. It's like, and
Yeah, I was out with my wife actually a couple of years ago. We were at a wildlife refuge in Delmarva, and I think we were shooting a heron at the time. It was sort of sitting there in front of us quietly. It was sort of a beautiful winter day, and there was
By shooting, you mean the nature photography?
That's right. That's right.
Yes,
We're not looking for dinner. The heron was, and off in the distance, I sort of was hearing some eagles, doing their sort of cackling noise. Sounds a little bit like a very large chicken. And Jen
That's
looks
our
at
national symbol.
and Jen looks at me and goes, "What is that noise?" I said, "That's bald eagles," and she'd never heard bald eagles, so she was sort of victim of the same hoax, right? That everybody's exposed to when they think they know what an eagle sounds like, because the movie people, television people all use the red-tailed hawk. So when you actually hear an eagle in person for the first time, it's a little bit disconcerting. Like you don't know what to make of it.
A little disappointing.
Yeah.
I once saw I was in the salt marsh looking at doing a Christmas bird count. I got to see a pair of bald eagles up in a cedar eating a great blue heron.
Yeah.
And it was like right about the courtship time, so they were like
Passing it back and forth.
yeah, well, they were just like nibbling at each other's bill and like preening each other, yet they were like covered in blood. So I wonder if they scavenged it or killed it. I suspect they killed it if it was that bloody.
Right. Yeah.
I will steer us slightly back towards hawks by talking about a different marsh, a bald eagle nest that I was probably getting a little too close to, and then got away from. But we noticed that like close to the base of this enormous, I want to say sycamore, I'm not sure what kind of tree, it might have been a sycamore, there was a corpse of a red-tailed hawk that we guess sort of got a little too close to the bald eagle nest, and then that was it for the red tail.
Well, there's that video of a eagle cam where for some reason a red-tailed hawk flies into
It's
a
like
bald eagle
watching
nest.
someone turn the wrong way up a highway or
Yes.
something.
Yeah,
you
flies
know? You're
into-
like, what are you doing?
It flies into a bald eagle nest with the female eagle on the nest, and she just like, it's crazy. I mean,
She just grabs it and kills it.
yeah, it's like instantly. It's like, and then just like, oh, I guess I have food, and starts plucking it. But it was crazy for how big a red-tailed hawk is.
Yeah.
How the eagle it was just like, no problem.
Crunch.
Yeah. Right.
So let's set the scene a little bit where we're standing. As we stand here, we've been watching both house sparrows and I think white-throated sparrows
Yeah.
zip around us. Logan Circle is kind of a big monumental square in the middle of Philadelphia, and there's the Ben Franklin Parkway, which is this majestic parkway that heads out to the art museum.
It's like modeled after like the avenues in Paris.
Exactly, and it is lined with big stone and brick and brownstone buildings. The big central library is near us. The big Catholic basilicas over there. We got a couple of big museums, and then some skyscrapers towering around us. The circle itself has.
Is it actually Logan Square, but it's a circle, or vice versa?
I've
forget.
seen both. People,
Yeah.
I call
'Cause
it Logan Circle, but
it's
I
a
think the
circle
official
with-
name is Square.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
it is a square, but there's a circle within the
That's
square.
right. Yeah.
Whatever shape you'd like. It is. There's a fountain in the middle where we actually are one of our first episodes of the whole podcast. We talked with Isa Betancourt, who's an entomologist at the neighboring Academy of Natural Sciences, who does a bug sampling study using the fountain as a bug trap. Essentially, all these bugs drown in it, and then she can fish them out and see what's flying by. Currently, the fountain's empty. But it's planted with some low shrubs
And the controversial polonias.
and the controversial polonias. There are these enormous polonias, aka princess trees, which are an exotic. In most other places, considered in our country, like considered kind of a trash tree. It grows up on railroad tracks or in urban settings.
It's alien.
It's alien, and so there are these enormous polonia trees here that were all just reaching the end of their natural lives, and they took them out, and then like everybody wanted them to plant, or the neighbors all wanted them to plant the same kind of tree again. And so those of us who are more the urban nature folks were like, oh, come on, we have to plant polonias. But they're here, and so now they're growing bigger and bigger. But I think there's some native plantings in the shrubbery. I don't know. What does this stuff look like?
I have to look at it. It looks like it's, they had some taxus, and then they probably planted some. Those are hydrangeas. I'm not sure which ones they are.
Maybe
It looks
not
like
native.
there's some
Who knows?
native. Looks like there's some probably native or native-ish dogwood shrubs planted.
Yeah. But the shrubbery attracts a lot of small birds, white-throats, house sparrows. I think that's probably mostly it.
What about the rats, Christian?
And lots of rats. Lots and lots of rats. We haven't seen one this morning. The hawks are doing a good job, probably. Plus, there's snow on the ground. It's a little cold. But the reason that the hawks... So there's a pair of red-tailed hawks on the parkway. The female has been here for about a decade, and she's now on her fourth mate, as far as we know.
What do you call her, Christian?
We call her Mom, which is to say the community of hawk watchers, sort of the Hawks fans, they have a Facebook page and everything, call her Mom. And they often roost on the facade of the Franklin Institute on cold nights like this. Conveniently, of course, not today, so we haven't actually seen any hawks this morning. But they like the square here because of the rats in the parkway generally. Rats and pigeons, but probably predominantly rats, are the staple of their diet. It's easy for them to catch rats here. They'll sit on one of the tall light posts and then just swoop down on a rat and
Voila,
consume it right in
breakfast.
front of you. Yep.
I saw one at the library. It was sitting on the library, kind of has a moat around it. There's a water in it, but it prevents you from the sidewalk to get right up next to the side of the building. There's like a 10-foot drop in between. So I guess the hawk felt secure, and it was perched on the ledge at eye level, only like 4 feet from me. But yet there was this gap in between, so I guess it felt safe. And it was just pulling apart a rat, and you could hear it like crunching through the bones and hearing the sinew rip. It was spectacular.
So hard to follow that, Tony. Do you guys want to walk just a little bit and see if we?
Sure.
We're within sight of the city hall where the peregrine is too. So there's other raptors about. There's also some Cooper's hawks. I saw one when I was here for the Women's March right after Trump.
I think I saw the same Cooper's hawk because I was with
Yeah.
some people and I saw this like flock of pigeons like in a ball.
Yeah, that was exactly what I saw. Yeah.
I was like, "There's a Cooper's hawk up there somewhere."
we see lots and lots of Cooper's hawks. They're just not as predictable as to where to find them as the red tails.
And Christian, you were saying there was a Cooper's hawk that's been trying to
Yeah.
horn in on the red tail space.
Yeah, so so the red tails and the Cooper's hawk's territory seem to overlap, and they mostly leave each other alone. It's the same thing that you were saying with the eagles before. During the nesting season, the Cooper's hawks don't get too close to the red tail nests, and everybody's happy. Yeah, but there's been a young, immature Cooper's hawk, a male, around the circle this fall because of the sparrows. It's sort of an easy meal for them, and the red tails have been pretty aggressive in chasing him off, beating him up a little whenever they can find him. So I don't know if he's still actually around.
Poor guy.
Yep.
All right, so, and just in terms of perspective right here, we have walked around the circle, so now we're looking straight down the parkway at the Philadelphia Museum of Art, which is being hit with the beautiful light of the early morning. One of the things that I love about red-tailed hawks is that they are, A, they've become quite urban, and B, they are easy to see. And so for a lot of people, it's a great access point for urban nature. When I was doing some research for this episode, I had trouble finding, let's call it, sort of scientific literature about red-tailed hawks in urban settings specifically. It seems that because they're doing relatively, and if I'm wrong, please let us know. We would love to feature your research. But they're a species that does pretty well in general. They're not like they're not endangered or anything, and so there's less money, I guess, to support researching them from sort of government sources.
Yeah. I'm aware of one study, sort of a long-term study of urban red-tailed hawks' nests, which appear to show that, they do very well in cities, and they do even a little bit better in the urban core than in less dense, more suburban neighborhoods in terms of nest productivity. Wasn't entirely clear why, probably lots and lots of food.
Yeah.
The rats we mentioned earlier, maybe better microclimates. But the conclusion was that cities might effectively be sources for red-tailed hawks.
Hey, podcast listeners. The study that Christian was referring to is called Landscape Correlates of Reproductive Success for an Urban-Suburban Red-Tailed Hawk Population, published by William Stout, Stanley Temple, and Joseph Papp. This is from the Journal of Wildlife Management in 2006. The study was conducted in Milwaukee and surrounding counties.
So that cities are sort of producing more hawks than they
So
can
when you
support.
talk about a source, you're talking about sources versus sinks.
Yes, correct. Yeah. So it's not a place. So the narrative is not, well, they're moving into cities because their quote unquote natural habitat is being destroyed or fragmented or anything like that. It actually seems like cities are, in the ways relevant to red-tailed hawks, perfect habitat.
And it's not, and you worry sometimes that a city, or you can set up what you hear sometimes called an ecological trap, where a habitat might look attractive to an animal, I guess, or plant, but usually I hear this about animals, that they're then drawn to the city where then they have lower reproductive success than they otherwise
That's
would.
right.
And so it kind of like is a vacuum that keeps sucking in surrounding animals, and that's a sink, and then it's a source if it's the opposite, where they're producing enough offspring to then fly off and populate other places.
It's funny, we're guilty of this as well, especially like if you look at our logo, it's a peregrine falcon.
Yes.
And it makes sense for a couple of reasons. They actually nest on buildings almost exclusively in the urban setting. And it's a good choice for our podcast because the peregrines live almost around the world.
Yeah, I think
And red tails are only a North American species. But there are way more red tails in the city than peregrines.
Yeah.
And yet we always think of like the peregrine as like the urban raptor, but yet there's probably at least 10 to 1, if not 20 to 1.
I would imagine. I think the city is sort of, wherever, at least in Philadelphia, wherever you think there should be a red-tailed hawk nest, there is one, effectively. So, there's 3 or 4 nests between the Art Museum and the Falls Bridge along the river alone.
And that's probably 4 or 5 miles.
That's about 4 miles of road along a river.
Like every mile or so, there's a nest.
Yes.
That's another way to
There's
say it. Yeah.
definitely one on the east side of Center City.
Yeah, no, and there's some in Center City. Obviously, young birds sometimes get in trouble with vehicle collisions, after they fledge, so that happens. Rat poison is a problem in terms of poisoning of hawks, so that happens.
I just had it removed from the environmental center. There are these things on the...
the little black boxes.
Yeah, I'm now the director of environmental center, and it's not like someone walked me through everything that,
Maintenance does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, we had a contractor come by, and they're like, yeah, oh, cool. Talking, and they're like, yeah. I was like, what are you doing? What's that box? She's like, oh, it's the rat poison. I was like, did you just say rat? I was like, no, get us out of here now. Because with rodenticide, from what I gather, it's a bait in a box that the rodents come in, they nibble on it, and then it causes them to, eventually bleed from within.
It's an
internally
anticoagulant.
hemorrhage.
Yeah.
So,
That's a problem with other urban predators, with bobcats and mountain lions and stuff.
But in fact, the penultimate male hawk on the Parkway succumbed to rat poisoning a couple of years ago. He was weakened, and then I think he collided with the Franklin Institute building, and then just died a few days later.
So while we're waiting for a hawk show, let me get into a quick mini debate.
Go ahead.
Well, I don't know if we can debate because we would agree.
Hawks suck. No, they don't.
No, well, one of the things people, someone had said this. I might have even thought this and they didn't say it, but I don't remember. Of course, with my cat arguments, there's a whole idea of a barn cat, right?
Yeah.
So what's better, a barn cat or rodenticide? What's worse, I guess, for the environment? A barn cat or rodenticide?
I would say the cat, but I am kind of torn on the topic. I'm trying to think I know I'm adding more nuance. What are are there rodenticides that are more confined in their effects than the anticoagulants they tend to use now? I don't know. What do you think? Because the cats are going to kill all kinds of other stuff besides the mice.
Yeah.
So right.
And they're going to kill lots of other things besides the mice. Plus, they're also killing, probably killing mice that are good, that we like,
Our voles and whitefoots and etc. Yeah.
I haven't heard. I do understand that it's the number one reason rehab centers get a raptor is from rodenticide poisoning, but yet I don't hear that it's a significant cause in the decline anywhere.
No, it doesn't. These red tails, it doesn't seem to affect. Again, we don't really have good numbers, right? Because nobody really studies this, as far as I know. It doesn't seem to harm the population, but obviously lots of individual raptors end up having shorter and probably more miserable lives as a result of sort of chronic or semi-chronic, growing weaker from a buildup of anticoagulant. Now, which one's better or worse? I don't know that that's necessarily the right question.
That's one thing that could be argued. Working cats, as people say.
There are probably better ways to manage rodent problems to start with.
So, not surprisingly, the media center of our country has some media about the hawks with some... They did and this is one of the studies I was able to find. In 2007, the New York City Audubon did a raptor breeding survey. They found about 20 nests of red-tailed hawks in New York City, plus about 12 pairs that looked like they were nesting, but they couldn't quite find the nests. About half of those nesting that they could find, I guess, those nests were located on human structures.
Hey, podcast listeners. I need to make clear that the following anecdotes are from news reports, not from the Audubon's raptor study.
At St. John's University in Queens, people who were walking too close to red-tailed nest there kept getting dive bombed, and some people got a little torn up and get their scalps a little bit bloodied. There were funny stories about hawks trying to pick off people's chihuahuas from their fire escapes, although that was unclear whether that was just more of a defensive thing around the nest or if they just thought the chihuahua would make a good meal, because the same people had their pit bull attacked also on their fire escape, and so then they're like, okay, well, maybe that's more about a predator or a defensive response.
Yeah.
Or it could be the hawk wanted to perch on the ledge and then those little things nipping at him. Or big things nipping at him. Who knows?
Who knows?
Who knows?
New York was sort of like, has been a focus of media about them because they've had this very charismatic, or they had for a long time, this hawk called Pale Male that got a lot of attention. And then the community of hawk watchers developed in New York, kind of similar to the community of hawk watchers we have in Philadelphia. Where's the line? I'm sort of trying to find the favorite line for this paper. The hybridization of ecological imaginaries, as it were, lags behind the hybridization of ecologies.
Yeah.
It was a good line. We'll dive into this in a minute, but the idea is that a lot of what we talk about in this podcast and people who get into urban nature get into is that we get stuck with these very binary ideas of the wild and the urban, or the countryside and the urban, and nature belongs out there and not in here. Or the red-tailed hawks are a species, I mean, frankly, they'll say the same for the white-throated sparrows around us, but the red-tailed hawks, in a very big, emblematic way, like show that these binaries aren't accurate, or that the reality of their lives is not how we would construct them.
That's right. Yeah. No, I think that captures really well in much simpler words. I was drawn into the hawks about maybe 5 years ago. I've sort of been vaguely aware of the red-tailed hawk's nest that was, at the time, it was on the window ledge of the Franklin Institute, just a few steps away from here, overlooking the Parkway. And I think it might have been a column you were writing for Grid Magazine, and they wanted pictures of the red-tails. And so I went down there.
For years, I was writing for Grid Magazine, and Christian was like the photographer.
Yeah, but this was early days, and
Yeah.
I'm a sort of a wildlife photographer on the side, and I'm sort of, fall victim to these binaries as well. When I go shoot wildlife, I go to sort of wildlife refuges and nature preserves and, places that are sort of effectively set aside for wildlife. And so going down to the Parkway to shoot red-tailed hawks felt a little strange to me at the time, right? It was sort of, I remember an afternoon in May, the hawks were sort of big enough to be jumping around on the window ledge, a couple of stories up. It was sort of beautiful sunlight like today, but it was rush hour on a weekday. It was noisy and smelly and dirty, and the hawks were sort of, tame. They sat there. You didn't have to do any of the usual stuff that you do when you're like wildlife photographer out in the field. You sort of, you have to be quiet and patient and sort of sit, it feels a little bit sort of vaguely heroic to be doing that. Here you could just walk up to these things and take their picture, and it didn't feel particularly challenging or even very interesting. I mean, the light was nice, so I was happy about that. But then I went back a little while later, and suddenly it sort of dawned on me there's something going on here, right there. I mean, first of all, I met all these people who were sort of camped out at the nest, watching it, sort of semi-religiously or very sort of regularly on a daily basis. So that was interesting, and they seemed to know a lot about the way these hawks were sort of moving through the territory. They had a sort of a good mental map of their territory, their daily habits, what they were doing, how that year's nesting season was different from the previous year's nesting season. And then suddenly this sort of whole ecology sort of revealed itself, right? The prey animals, the rats, the pigeons, the squirrels, the human community that had sort of grown up around the hawks, to the point of naming them, being able to identify individual animals. And so the Parkway revealed itself to be prime wildlife habitat right here in the middle of the city in a way that I hadn't really ever thought about or was aware of. And I think what often happens when we do become aware of it, we're sort of taught to devalue it, right? We talk about the non-native species or the rodenticide and the vehicle collisions, all the sort of human-made threats, as though all of it were terrible. And a lot of it is sort of terrible. and yet the hawks seem to get by just fine, right, as a species. So it sort of calls into question a lot of these ideas that we have about where nature is supposed to be or not supposed to be in the city. So yeah, in that sense, it sort of was an eye-opener for me.
I hear you saying, like, my Malayan night heron on my list is, for some reason, there's a population that's in the Botanic Gardens in Taipei.
Yeah.
And it's usually a bird that's like super hard to see.
Right.
And it's like this rainforest heron, but yet you can just walk up to it right there on the lawn, and it somehow feels less.
It feel cheaper for you when you
but
find
like
it that way?
I know better, So like I remember in Australia, Phillip Island, like to go see the blue penguins, little penguins. My bandmates were on a tour, didn't want to pay to go see the penguins because they're like, well, you're sitting on bleachers and you're just watching them come in, and I'm like, yeah, what's wrong with that? And they just thought like cheapen the experience, but I'm like, this is where they breed, and it's like the humans are the ones. The penguins are wild. The humans are the ones like confined. You're literally confined in an area that you can't leave.
Right.
It's for the penguins' protection, but it's like it's no less cool or remarkable. It's way better for the penguins. But it is weird how like if we're like taught, even people who do this for a hobby and specialize in it like us, it's still a little bit in the back of our minds like it's not as cool to see something. It's not it's hard. If something's harder to see, it's like better to see it in the wild, in what we think is the wild, like in a forest or like a big prairie or whatever, rather than just like in a city. But it is really cool.
They're here.
Yep.
I haven't seen any. I don't think I've ever seen a peregrine in the wild. Well, I was going to say in the wild. This is the wild. I haven't seen a peregrine outside of a city. I've seen multiple peregrine falcons in Philadelphia.
Right.
I remember I have to be circumspect about where I was, but I was in an urban place in the Midwest doing what I do, herping, and I found like several fox snakes, which are not necessarily a very rare snake, but they're something you think about out in like prairies and farm country and maybe wetlands in the Midwest. And it was basically a park in the city where I was sort of tripping over them. It's like, here's another one. I was feeling kind of guilty. It was like the easiest. It's like I should be sweating more to justify this like experience, but it was still a great time.
Yeah.
We are now looking at Moore College of Art and Design, which is, this meant we walked across the circle. It's next to the Academy of Natural Sciences. It is a 7-story building, just a blocky, modernist brick and concrete looking thing.
With a lot of glass in the entryway.
With some trees right across the street,
That's
so
right.
they reflect in the glass.
Yeah, and so one summer, I want to say it was 2014, during the nesting season, the hawks had raised 3 chicks, and of course they duly fledged in early June. They usually have 3 or 2 chicks, sort of depending on the year, but it was 3 that year. And the remarkable thing about the story of the Parkway hawks up until then is that, as far as the hawk watchers sort of were aware, none of the chicks previously, 12 or 15 up to that point, had died during the time on the Parkway.
It's not a bad rate for wild hawks either.
There's lots of traffic here, so definitely vehicle collisions are always an option for sort of a, clumsy young hawk.
Just in general, with hawks, it's 70% die within the first year.
Oh yeah. So we don't know what happens after that, right? Because they tend to disperse.
They could starve to death,
they could starve to death. They could be killed by an owl, or all sorts of mishaps happen to them. They disperse from the Parkway around Labor Day. Usually, sort of give it. Maybe sometimes they stick around a little bit longer, but they eventually leave, and so nobody really knows what happens to them then. But anyway, so up until that year, not a lot of casualties, at least during the nesting season that we're. Sometimes there'd be, early fledges and things like that, and and people would scoop up a young hawk and take them to the wildlife clinic at the Schuylkill Center for observation or something like that. So that would happen. They'd often be fine after that. Anyway, so the That summer, the hawks were spending a lot of time on Logan Circle here, diving after birds, the adults as well as eventually the juveniles. People speculated why that was the case. There were some major construction projects on the parkway, the Barnes Foundation. The museum was getting built, and so people thought, well, maybe some of the rats were getting displaced, or there weren't as many rats for whatever reason.
Or the homeless people who tend to camp out around here
Were not here because of the construction. I mean, there's this sort of interconnected ecology of food waste and rats and pigeons, and obviously...
Or not even just them, it's people who walk around and toss their pretzels in the trash can. Maybe there's your foot traffic. Less foot traffic that also...
So for whatever reason, the sort of prey availability had sort of shifted a little bit, and the hawks were spending a lot of time down here on Logan Circle, going after birds in these trees. And then within sort of a matter of weeks, 2 of the fledglings flew, face first into the glass facade of the Moore College, and both hawks died. One maybe not immediately, a few days later. But sort of 2 fatal collisions. And the hawk watchers, of course, were sort of pretty upset by this. This sort of, was a departure from normal for them.
And they get it, as you observe something and sort of rooting for them to...
Oh, yeah, no, and they were, and they sort of got organized, and they got a little email and social media campaign going to contact the college and say, look, isn't there something we can do about these giant glass windows above your entryway? And the college responded very quickly with a proposal to have some of their students design some textile banners and to hang them in front of the glass windows above the entryway, and they've been there ever since. And
you would look at it and think, oh, it's a College of Art and Design. Of course they're hanging those banners.
That's right. But
I think they call them scrims.
Right.
Like in front of their building.
Yeah, and they switch them out every now and then as students make new ones. Yeah, but it might keep some birds from colliding with that window. But I thought it was sort of an interesting story because it, again, brings home this idea that there is sort of a way to make urban spaces useful or less deadly, right, both to humans. I mean, it hasn't changed the use of the building for the people that use it and made it slightly more aesthetically attractive, arguably. And it might save...
I'm not such a fan of this kind of modernist architecture, but that's a topic for another day.
Yeah, but it might save some birds' lives, or at least people were sort of thinking about it in those terms, right? That there are things we could be doing to make sort of the built environment built by and for humans friendlier to animals and wildlife. Some people talk about this in terms of sort of reconciliation ecology, right? The idea that you can have, or win-win ecology, right? You can sort of have your city, but with just a little bit of work, you can make it friendlier to non-human species, and this is sort of one example of that.
I solved the window collision problem now.
Oh yeah?
Moving forward.
Just keep the windows open?
Well, everybody keeps trying to do every new building is all glass.
Yeah, especially now, these Comcast towers that are going up here. Yeah.
So we got to go back to brutalism.
Yeah, that's right. More of that.
A whole lot of cement.
Yeah.
Why can't we go to brick? I like the brick.
Yeah. Go back to brutalism. They go down like the roundhouse, like the police headquarters in Philly. Like, how many birds do you find there, Let's go back to brutalism. Save the birds.
Sounds good.
Other solutions that have been found have been films that you can lay on the windows, because the birds basically need to see, I figure it's an inch or two, or lines or images no more than an inch or two apart, and that will represent to the birds something they can't fly through. And then on Temple's campus, Temple University, they found that just like at migration season, especially if they just roll down some mesh nets in front of the really problem windows, that cuts back a lot on the collisions, because the birds just either they see them or they just bounce off of them, and it's not like hitting glass. So the big problem windows tend to be reflective windows that reflect vegetation, so that the birds, what'll happen, this is what we found at least in Philadelphia, Audubon working with the Audubon working with the Academy of Natural Sciences, Keith Russell from Audubon I don't know if he led the studies, was very involved in the studies, and I interviewed him about them. What really seems to kill them is when the birds,
Cooper's hawk.
That's a Cooper's hawk? Yep. All right, nice. There's a Cooper's hawk flying right above the Blue Cross building.
No, that's a harrier.
Oh, what?
Am I seeing what I'm thinking I'm seeing?
It's too big for a Cooper's. I think you're right. Or it's one of the red tails. It can't be that big.
So it just disappeared between some skyscrapers. A challenge of birding in Center City. you get a picture, you can
I
zoom
don't
in.
know. The wings look kind of long.
Yeah,
Is that a Harrier?
that's a Harrier.
That's crazy.
Why is the Harrier here?
Oh, there's anybody here?
I know, but okay. What's a Harrier doing hunting for rats that high up? Shouldn't it be like skimming over the parkway? I don't know.
Let's see it again. Oh. That's too big to be a Cooper's, that's for sure.
Harriers and Coopers are about the same size.
Really? I feel like the Harriers have like longer wings.
Yeah.
Longer wings, yeah.
Yeah, well, they weigh the same probably.
But you don't think it's a red tail with its
No,
wings?
it's definitely not.
Okay.
You were
cool.
talking about
Oh,
Audubon.
how they basically walked around picking up dead birds. Is that it over there? Migrating birds will
Have it?
land, like they're taking a break on their flight, and then they'll sort of like think, oh look, a shrub, or oh look, a tree, and fly right over to it and smack into the glass,
Huh.
and that's how a lot of them die. All right, we're looking at the. It's a Harrier. Well, we were not expecting to see this. So it has sort of like a short-looking head,
Huh?
which is always what
There it
strikes
is.
me as funny about the Harriers. Kind of owl-looking heads, right?
Yep, no, there it is.
Tony, give us a quick synopsis. Tell us about Harriers and where
It's
you
sort
would
of flying.
ordinarily expect to see
Over a
them.
marsh or a
It's over the church
prairie
now.
tundra.
And so they classically like fly kind of like a little low to the ground.
Yeah.
At sort of an even level, like watching the marsh, or I think of them over marshes.
Yeah.
Like looking down to see like a
still
little
fly?
mouse or bird that they can pop down on.
Flying toward,
Now it's flying north.
it's over 16th and Callowhill now. Not quite that far north. Over the tall skyscraper right in front of us, Tony, to the right. It's right over top, the skyscraper now.
Not an
That is a Harrier. That is
Yep.
crazy.
Yes.
It's funny how we're
Not the hawk we were trying to see.
totally different species, and one you usually don't associate with urban places.
That's right.
But super neat. Anyhow, but the that same year, Christian, I think another of the red-tail fledglings was injured, rehabbed, and then, if I'm remembering this, was released into a more classically wild setting.
Yeah, we don't know for sure because the wildlife folks at the clinic sort of wouldn't say, but they released the bird. You know, this is the one surviving bird. Probably collided with a car. Was sort of found one morning, a little dazed, and taken to the wildlife clinic for rehab. Spent a month there, and then was released by the rehabber to parts unknown. I mean, so some of the hawk watchers were sort of asking, well, why wasn't the young hawk returned to the parkway, right? Because usually they spend, the sort of later part of the summer and early fall sort of being taught by the parents, how to hunt and sort of how to survive, and they bring food, and the sort of family bonds that seem to persist a little bit after the young birds fled, right? They don't fledge and then immediately become independent, but it's sort of a process of 2 or 3 months where the ties gradually sort of, the leash is lengthened, and eventually.
Okay, so we just turned around. And
A couple of hawk watchers I remember at the time sort of asking, well, why wasn't he returned to the parkway, right, where he
Yeah.
sort of belongs? And again, raising this question of where do these birds belong?
Yeah.
The rehabber's arguments were, well, they're, it's dangerous, obviously, vehicle collisions, and a more sort of quasi-natural place is better for them. And yet, interestingly, what's interesting about this story, I think, is that the hawks then abandoned, like that winter, they abandoned the nest at the Fleckman Institute because, I guess, as far as they knew, all their 3 offspring had died that summer. And they started building a nest over the train tracks over the Schuylkill, 30th Street station. That didn't work out. The male ended up getting killed by colliding with the train. But it reminded me of a different story in New York around the pale male nest, where they'd also had a rehab story, and they brought the fledgling back to Central Park, and the male hawk immediately flew into the tree to greet the young hawk and to sort of welcome him back. And so that I think that made people wonder, like, to what extent are we thinking about these hawks as sort of individuals with a sense of sort of their family group, and maybe a sense of, did they evaluate the nesting site and sort of said, this no longer works, we're going to try and move somewhere else.
Yeah.
And what if the hawk had been returned? They might have stayed at the Frenton Institute, maybe not. It's just sort of an interesting question to what extent the hawks.
And it also, this led to your title of your paper. Why not the city?
Yeah, why not the city? And also this sort of other question in animal studies and sort of on the social sciences side is, are there ways that we can listen to the voices of these animals, right? I mean, they can't talk to us, obviously. We can observe their behavior and sort of learn from it. But the fact that they certainly communicate with each other and that they're very aware of, who's family, who's not family, who's an intruder.
Hey, podcast listeners. Tony, Christian, and I failed to actually find any red-tailed hawks on this walk. So here's a little bit of audio from the previous week when Christian and I encountered Mom.
At around 7:30, Christian and I chatting, walking around, trying to find the red-tailed hawks off of Logan Circle in Center City, Philadelphia, on a somewhat cloudy morning in the probably 40s by now. We're walking up, what is that, Ray Street? No, Vine. And around the Basilica, the Roman Catholic Basilica, and we were just chatting and look up, and all of a sudden, whoop, there's a hawk in a smallish London plane tree. What do you call her?
Mom.
The hawk, suitably named Mom, looking a little fluffed up, like I think she spent the night there.
Somewhere around here. It's possible.
Yeah.
But they often like the tall buildings.
So kind of chilling in a smallish London plane tree, right above Sister Cities Park, which is this neat little natural style landscaped park in Center City, Philadelphia, which in the summer is a great place for kids to kind of like splash around in a wading pool. There it goes.
And this. Did you see where it went?
It's the same tree. It's
okay.
to the left a little bit. So while we're standing here, we've been also watching a Cooper's hawk that's in a London plane tree, which is kind of like a sycamore.
Which is a sycamore. It's a hybrid of two different sycamores.
I know, but our sycamores are so much better looking than the London plane trees,
I don't know. It's pretty similar.
No, but when you see like an American one that has like the white bark showing, and I just like them so much more than the London plane trees. But this Cooper's hawk is sort of hanging out in this
Actually,
London
it looks like
plane
a London plane next to a sycamore. See, the one next to it looks like a sycamore that has the bark all the way to the...
Yeah.
And then the other one that is exfoliating all the way down to the bottom.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing it.
It just popped over to the other side of the tree, I thought. I sort of lost track of it when it did, but I see it. There it is. Okay. Crossing the street while you're birding in an urban setting calls for a little caution because your eyes are always up. You got to remember, there's trucks.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we kind of have expected to see a Cooper's hawk, but not expect it at all. Never in a million. I don't think in a million years I would have said we've seen a Harrier flying between skyscrapers in downtown Philadelphia. I mean, I would think so in migration, but they should be over by now.
So the Cooper's hawks, which you'll hear about if you listen to of course, you'll all be listening next to the Field Guides episode about urban Cooper's hawks. Quickly, they are a different genus, accipiters.
Yeah, accipiter.
And then which are sort of, to me, look like sort of leaner, less bulky, more sort of graceful looking hawks and tend to eat birds, correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And so in Philly, you'll see, we were talking about it before a little bit, about the Women's March, but when you see a flock of pigeons, sometimes they just seem to swirl around for no good reason, but it seems like they're going this way and they're going that way, and they're kind of like in this ball. Like, then look around for a slightly bigger pigeon that's chasing all the other ones. And that could be a Cooper's hawk. I think of it like when you watch those great nature documentaries about a ball of bait fish, with all the tuna coming in and trying to hit them. Like, that's what the flock of pigeons looks like when there's that Cooper's hawk trying to pick one off out of the flock.
Cooper's has a full crop and a bloody beak, and apparently just at breakfast.
So thanks again for listening to another episode of the Urban Wildlife Podcast. We want to thank our buddy Christian.
Yep, you're welcome. It's fun.
Where do you work?
I work at Drexel University, where I teach environmental politics.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
And do you remember what journal was your article in?
Nature and Culture.
There we go. All right. So again, follow this podcast episode up by listening to the Field Guides Cooper's Hawk episode. you want to get in touch with us, send us an email at urbanwildlifecast@gmail.com. You can find us on Twitter at urbwildlifecast. You can find us easily on Facebook. Get in touch with us. Let us know what you think and what ideas you might have for episodes. What wildlife can you walk around your city and observe? Or what are you researching in your city? If you're a researcher, we love to get in touch and hear about what you're doing. And this is a great way to get the word out about it. Please leave us a positive review and a rating on your podcast listening app of choice. Spread the word about it. Till next time, get outside and enjoy some nature, even if you're in the heart of a major city like Philadelphia.
Bye-bye. Enjoy yourselves.
So actually later that day, early afternoon, we were driving out Chestnut Street from where we live in West Philadelphia towards Center City, where we had been looking at the hawks. And around 39th Street or so, I had spotted a Cooper's hawk flying over a mid-height apartment block, and then was like checking out the trees towards the base on the street level and saw a red-tailed hawk perched in the tree. So I'm not sure if the two were directly connected, but it seemed really funny to see both a Cooper's hawk and a red-tailed hawk just happen to be on the street after we were looking so hard for them earlier in the day.